TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's TellyCast. This week, we're gazing into the future with my guests Ben Page, Chief Executive of Ipsos MORI, and Jonathan Broughton, Managing Director of Workshare Consulting. And career coach and wellbeing expert Tracy Forsyth gives us some tips on projecting confidence in meetings and pitches. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. Before we start this week's show, a reminder to sign up for TellyCast Plus, our brand new newsletter containing my picks for stories of the week, interesting charts, rumours, execs for hire, and all sorts of other interesting TV industry stuff from around the web you may have missed this week, compiled by me. It's completely free. Just sign up at telecast-podcast.com. That's telecast-podcast.com, and it'll drop into your email inbox every Friday. You'll also find the link in the episode description. So, sign up now and we'll see you in your inbox every Friday. So it's a slightly different TellyCast this week. This time of year, it's traditional for industry media to take a look back at the year and reflect on the key issues and turning points that have shaped the year in TV. But I think we've covered that off already. And let's face it, who wants to go back and relive a year that many of us probably want to chuck in the bin? So let's look forward to 2021 instead. Most of the talk about Brexit will be over, and hopefully many of us will be able to access a coronavirus vaccine that, fingers crossed, should enable us to move back to some sort of normality. Now, we all know that many things will have changed forever in terms of the content industry, and we've been discussing that on many of our previous shows. But I wanted to try and picture change both at a macro consumer level to find out what the public might be looking for in 2021, as well as the TV industry side of things. So hopefully we'll be able to paint a bit of a picture and provide some insight into what producers might consider pitching to networks and streamers, and try and anticipate what type of shows might be in demand in 2021. To help with that, first of all, I chatted with Ben Page, Chief Executive of Ipsos MORI, a frequent writer and speaker on trends, leadership, and performance management. Ben has directed thousands of surveys examining consumer trends and citizen behaviour. And following that, I caught up with Jonathan Broughton, Managing Director of Workshare Consulting, who takes us through his predicted TV industry trends for 2021. So I'm delighted to welcome Ben Page, Chief Executive of Ipsos MORI, to TellyCast. Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, actually. Yeah, I mean, the year has turned out to be one of our best years ever, but it certainly didn't look that way in April.
No. I think a lot of people may be weathering the storm a little bit better than they may have thought in sort of May, June time when it all looked a bit bleak. Thank you for joining us and spending time. And I realise that Ipsos MORI is incredibly active within the whole COVID monitoring. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So obviously we're tracking public opinion, but the other thing that we're doing with Imperial College, but also with the Office of National Statistics, is we're heavily involved in two separate studies which are looking at the prevalence of the disease in the population as a whole, because the challenge with the testing program at the drive-in centres is, of course, that's mostly people who have got symptoms of the disease coming to find out if they've got it. One of the big challenges with the disease is that many people who have it, between 50 to 80% in our samples, don't have any symptoms in a week before we randomly find them in the population. But of course, they may be infecting others. So what we've been doing from the summer is running very large studies involving hundreds of thousands of people who are sampled at random from NHS databases in order to see just where the disease is. What's showing up in hospitals is only part of what's actually going on. And in order to know how the lockdowns or otherwise need to be structured, you need that data. So we've been doing that for government, and it's keeping us incredibly busy. We had to build a cold chain of 5,000 courier vans with fridges in record time in order to collect swabs and keep them between 2 to 8 degrees to get them to the laboratory for the testing.
Wow. Huge logistical operation and possibly not something that we might have expected of Ipsos MORI.
It's one of the things about our business is that people think, they think of opinion polls or something, or maybe if you're in TV, you'll know that we're involved with things like Barb and viewing figures. But actually, I've got hundreds of documentary filmmakers all over the world who are doing ethnography, just studying people that we're using film. We're doing things in virtual reality. I mean, literally, you name it. If it's anything to do with what human beings do or think, we're probably doing it.
What I really wanted to talk about this week was really start a bit of future gazing into 2021. I think we've all had enough of 2020.
It can't be worse, right? It just cannot be worse. I think this is
No.
the good news, unless there's a meteor hits us. I take that back in case the meteor is coming. Otherwise, it can't be worse.
Really, on a sort of macro level, is to start to think about how we can emerge out of this pandemic and how that's going to affect consumer behaviour, and therefore how that is going to affect the TV industry and what that might mean for broadcasters and distributors and producers as well. So can you talk us through a few trends that you're expecting to see next year?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we run is called Ipsos Global Trends, which is a huge study, 22,000 people over 33 countries, where we track over the long term underlying changes among consumers and in societies. And we launched the report, of course, as luck would have it, in February. COVID was mentioned in the report, but nowhere near as much as it would have been if I'd published it in March. What we did as a result was then go back and repeat some of it in September to see what had shifted during the year. And I think there are 5 things that I think are happening, etc. So putting aside the massive economic dislocation of COVID for 1 second, we had thought that this would be the year of climate change. We had more searches for Greta Thunberg than Beyonce at the back end of last year. And actually what's happened during the pandemic is that concern about climate change has kept rising. Governments are using green recovery, green infrastructure, green energy as part of the stimulus packages to try and re-energize the economy and partly to sort of change employment in some cases and to build new industries. So we've seen overall across the world concern about climate change, despite the here and now problem of the pandemic. That's kept going. And I think that puts pressure on industry to think about how it reduces carbon in its activities, and broadcasting might be no different. But there will also be, how, people's behaviours. How are we going to change every boiler in Britain, which is what we will need to do in order to hit our targets.
That's fascinating. I mean, not only is it about consumers and how they need to adapt and how perhaps the TV industry can educate consumers in order to make those meaningful changes, but actually how TV businesses may also operate themselves. There are some guidelines in place, the Albert guidelines, in order to create greener programming. But essentially, you're seeing climate change as being a really key issue that's really going to be top of mind right across the world next year.
Consumers just expect business to do the right thing, and concern about it, interestingly, as I say, has just gone on rising globally. It's the one thing that people globally agree on as a problem. They don't all agree on the solutions, but globally, it is the thing that actually unites humanity in terms of what we're concerned about. The challenge is that people expect politicians and business people to fix things for them, and they want people to make it easy for them. And there are some good examples. Britain actually is a brilliant example on renewables. We're the world leader in the OECD countries in terms of renewables. And we've done that without a referendum. We've done that by just putting up electricity prices, changing some tax incentives and planning. And we've built the capacity to have, at lots of points of the year, all of our energy the majority of our energy coming from renewables. So there's lots that people can do, but they will need nudging, and they expect leadership, and broadcasting and TV can be part of that leadership.
Well, there's some tips not only on content, but obviously on strategic approach for TV businesses there. What else are you seeing in terms of major trends in 21?
Yeah, I think the other thing is because people's incomes are going to be squeezed, we've got estimates of unemployment hitting 7.75%, which is a massive increase, and from where we were just a few months ago. And you've also got a pandemic disease around that is going to keep on killing people, and we aren't all going to be vaccinated until late summer at the earliest next year. So you can what we are likely to see, and we've already seen some signs of this, is a rise in sort of nostalgia, and we've certainly seen some of that during lockdown in terms of content, but also simplicity. And so it's sort of staying at home more. You've got less money, you cook more meals at home, you do a bit of DIY. It's those sort of simple pleasures, meeting friends. We saw it after 2008. And I think we'll see it again. After 2008, there was a sort of takeoff in things like knitting. Um, so you may see, home butchery and God knows what else. But I think there's certainly that sort of retreat to the home is certainly for the near future, because of a lack of money to a certain extent. People wanting to save money by not going out and splashing their cash in the same way. They're worried, even when they've kept their jobs, they're worried about the future. And there's been a massive increase, of course, in people's savings for those who've stayed in employment. But it is that sort of I think also lockdown has made a lot of people reappraise their spending. And actually, I certainly have my credit. Lockdown means, as a reasonably well-paid CEO, I save a lot of money during lockdown because, of course, I don't go out to restaurants all the time, etc. And then you sort of think, was that actually making me happy, spending all that money every week doing that? Or actually, I'm enjoying cooking at home sometimes? So I can see at different income points, you can see people reappraising things. And it's that sort of, actually, we can have a simpler life and we don't need to spend all that money.
Make do and mend 2.0, maybe.
Well, absolutely. And that, of course, in the fashion industry, that's another trend which cuts in with the climate change agenda and people reflecting on their consumption habits. Fast fashion is rapidly becoming, unacceptable politically.
Yeah, absolutely. And also that's another major contributor to climate change as well, in terms of an industry that is full of pollutants, etc. So maybe producers might be thinking of more craft-based format ideas.
Yeah, how do you fix things? How do you fix all the things around your home? What are you doing? A show about all the electronic devices that you have around your house that you no longer use anymore. Britain we're per capita, we're one of the most culpable in terms of throwing out electronic devices without restoring them. We're one of the biggest electronic polluters in the world. And everybody has got loads of gadgets around that and with lithium in them, etc. So there's probably something about that.
Yeah.
Instead of antiques, go and find your old electronic devices and cables and God knows what else and recycle them properly.
Good tips there. How about Black Lives Matter? I mean, that's obviously been a really key change this year. How does it affect things next year?
Well, we've got 68% of British businesses who say they're going to do more on inclusion and diversity in 2021. The lockdowns have focused people's minds on unfairnesses and inequality. We had the highest ever level of concern about race relations in Britain because of the murder of George Floyd in America during lockdown, which is really interesting. And I think there's also a generational shift going on. So people in their 40s and 50s sometimes don't appreciate what Gen Z feelings about this are. I mean, I felt this in my own business as a CEO. What I think is right on and woke as a 55-year-old is quite different than what a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old now thinks about. And so I think, certainly there is going to be more pressure coming from inside businesses, more pressure inside society to move on this. Remember, a third of school children now are Black, Asian, or minority ethnic. I don't particularly like that expression, but they're BAME now. So our society, the audience is literally changing. And I think we've hit this point where you're going to see action. Certainly businesses saying it's going to do things. What it actually does may not be as dramatic as what it says, but we're certainly going to need some action. And the media is not going to be excluded from that.
Evan Shapiro was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about lecturing to students at New York University. And this was something he was getting through loud and clear about the change that they're demanding when it comes to diversity and inclusion, both on camera and behind the camera as well. So this is something that was really, really an important issue for them. So businesses really, if they're not addressing this properly now, they really need to step up and look at things in 21.
Well, they're going to be called out. I mean, it's really interesting with Sainsbury's, having the black family for Christmas, and of course they get racists and trolls attacking them online, and then of course you see all the other supermarkets piling in on their side. The times have moved on, and it's not just about ethnicity. I mean, if you look at things like sexuality, 88% of people of my age describe themselves as completely straight. The figure for Gen Z is 66%. things are moving, and we've got to keep up with that. It's difficult because the audience is diverse. You've got one of the challenges in trying to please or indeed govern the British is that if you compare Britain now with how Britain was in the 1960s, in the 1960s, if you were describing British society, it would be like a sort of fairly tall mountain, and everybody, in terms of their income distribution, would be clustered around this fairly tall but narrow mountain. Now Britain has got, of course, we're heading for hundreds of thousands of people in their 90s. They have quite different attitudes from people in their 20s. In terms of income distribution, you've got just a wider range of income distribution and the opportunities that income distribution gives different people. So trying to please everybody, the audience is getting more and more heterogeneous in many ways. And I think, and also the societal expectations on diversity are changing. So lots of things to think about in that area, I think.
And you mentioned Sainsbury's, and, we've seen TV advertising, going through an extraordinary dip in 2020 and then rebounding somewhat. How are brands, big brands and challenger brands, how are you expecting to see brands addressing the market in 21?
I think there's huge opportunities for brands that, as always, and this is what we would say in any situation like this, that continue investing in brand building. And that's not tactical digital advertising. That is, getting to the mass audiences, being mentally and physically available. And TV remains absolutely vital for doing that. The other opportunity that big brands have is that during a moment of crisis, people return to the things that they know and love. Spam saw record sales during 2020, and people go back to the brands of their childhoods, so that all of that mental architecture that brands have built up over time pays off. There's also a sort of retreat to security and comfort. People want reassurance, and some of that is familiarity. We can see that. We've seen a big shift in drivers of consumer choice during 2020. So this is a moment for big brands to use their deep pockets to build on their advantages against some of the challenger brands, quite frankly. And it will be really interesting to see when the dust settles in a few years' time, who was sensible and did that.
What fascinated me was a number of brands that we all know and aware of, and obviously stimulate a certain emotional response when we see them, whether it's Kellogg's or whatever. We saw a lot of these brands stop advertising when there were record audiences through the summer, which was, to me, was extraordinary. It's a case of, if there's less advertisers, why wouldn't you carry on, really ram home your advantage?
I tend to agree with you. I think it's just that sort of short-term disruption. Everybody was panicking in March and April about spend and budgets. We saw I lost in April 10 to 20% of my revenue overnight, just disappeared of what I thought was going to be there. I mean, fortunately, it's now come back. But so I think for many brands, the short term about balancing the books, and if you're worried about things, you make those short term decisions. But of course, as I say, the ones that stay in the market often will benefit in the long run.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how those braver businesses will maybe be reaping the benefits in the months and years ahead. And how about the home? We're all stuck in the home, whether we like it or not, really. And we're all working from home. And obviously, hopefully that is going to loosen up and change a little bit. But it's pretty much changed forever, hasn't it?
I think it's likely that people won't go back to the 9 to 5 time spent inside what are effectively desk farms in many modern offices that we were used to before. Business leaders have noticed that they can run businesses successfully with home working. They've noticed that they themselves can work from home. And therefore, we've got half of British business saying that, and indeed globally, saying that they will move back to a blended type of home and office arrangement where people come in for 2 or 3 days a week, but do the thought work somewhere else. We've got British business predicting that it will use 20% less floor space in future. If you've got 5 offices, businesses are planning to close on average one of them. So that has all sorts of implications for our city centres. It has some implications for some brands, because if you're selling deodorant, one of the things we know is people use less of it when they work at home than when they go into an office. I think so. Home becomes more important. That's good for people like IKEA and DIY. Many people have enjoyed the flexibility and, as they see it, even if they're working longer hours, better work-life balance from working at home. So it seems very unlikely that we'll just flip back to how we were before. And I think, as with e-commerce, this is an acceleration of an existing trend, which means it's more likely to stick. We were already working more flexibly than 20 years ago, and this has just given it steroids. And it showed so many organizations that they don't even necessarily need an office. Proclaiming the death of the office, though, I'm certainly not doing that, because we need a place to build culture. We need to bring people together physically to do that. We need training places. We need serendipity. We need water cooler moments. You can't do all that on Zoom calls. But nevertheless, a sort of more flexible type of working with more time spent working at home seems almost certain for a lot of people in future.
Yeah. And again, there may be some programming ideas that producers may want to think about with the way that we're living, rapidly changing now and obviously here to stay.
I mean, yes, it's the revenge of suburbs, actually. If you look at footfall in London, what we noticed was a 60% decline in footfall in the middle of London, but only, even during lockdown, but only a 30% decline in the suburban areas where people are out and shopping locally, etc. And so something about suburbs might be interesting.
There's lots of food for thought there for TV producers and different businesses involved in the content industry. So thank you so much. I'd love to have you come on the show again, maybe sometime in 21, and we can maybe review where we are and maybe look again at some tips for the back end of the year.
Absolutely. And let's see which predictions come true, because as you know, most predictions are wrong. It's what keeps me in business.
Thank you, Ben, and take care. We'll see you soon.
No problem.
So to discuss the trends in 2021 in the TV industry specifically, I'm delighted to welcome Jonathan Broughton, Managing Director of Workshare Consulting. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to TellyCast.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
You've identified 5 kind of key trends that you think we're going to be seeing in the TV industry specifically over the next year or so. Can you take us through those?
The 5 trends, just to give a little summary, they're largely trends which are affecting, firstly, the interactions between VOD and pay TV. So we're talking streaming maturation and hybrid services and pay TV telco integration. At the same time, we're seeing the emergence of new players, new people who are interested in aggregating these VOD platforms and VOD services, people like Roku, people like Amazon Channels. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, we'll talk about how the maturation of the streaming model will in fact lend itself to changing business models and different ways to monetize content. So vertical integration and mergers and acquisitions. And finally, COVID crunch, talking about the ongoing effect of COVID in 2021.
We're all maybe hoping that 2021 is the year that we finally put COVID in the bin, but obviously it's going to be around for a little while until we all get a vaccine. It's obviously still going to have a lasting impact from January onwards. Talk us through this COVID crunch and how you see that playing out.
So COVID crunch is a term I'm using to talk about the impending, not recession, but cooling of the market, which we'll expect to happen in 2021. Effectively, a lot of entertainment services found that in 2020 there was, a huge increase in demand. Now, obviously, if you're running on an advertising model or if you're trying to install pay TV in people's homes, you might not have seen this because of the inherent difficulties in actually getting your product to market or getting people to pay for the advertising to fund it. But certainly there were huge areas which saw massive spikes. So we're talking TVOD, SVOD, effectively anything that has a transaction or subscription payment that was virtual saw a massive spike in usage, and for a lot of these companies, a spike in revenue. To put it bluntly, 2020 saw the highest growth of SVOD that there has ever been in absolute terms. So if you look at the sort of global market, it added between 3 and 4 billion pounds of new revenue, which it's not done before. So VOD had a good year in 2020, to put it bluntly. The problem with this is, and the VOD services, such as Netflix, have been warning about this as early as March this year, so that they're really on this, is that they expect that 2021 will show a cooling of growth. There's a couple of reasons for this. Naturally, you'd see that as people come out of lockdown, and I'm fully hoping that we are out of lockdown in 2021. That is my assumption. That naturally people's sort of entertainment habits will revert to back what they were more in the 2018-29 period. So more going out to the pub and restaurants and less staying in watching Netflix. So naturally there'll be people who are less interested in buying new subscription services because there isn't that need for so much entertainment. Yeah. And the second problem is SVOD's incredibly driven by the ability to create a pipeline. And effectively what this is it's the free trial list. It's exposing people to the idea that your SVOD has some nice entertainment content. It's getting them interested in that. It's getting them a free trial. It's getting their credit card details. And then it's converting them to be a full subscriber, and that takes months and months and months. And in fact, in some cases, people exist on this sort of funnel of conversion for a year or more. 2020 saw a huge number of these sort of funneled consumers turning into full SVOD subscribers, which is great for 2020, but it means that in 2021, of course, this funnel is very empty. There aren't enough potential subscribers that exist in the pool to continue to grow the pot. So, long story short, what we'll see in 2021 is actually, like I said, not a recession, but growth rates in SVOD, which are perhaps half of what they were in 2020. Which is interesting because if you also think about 2021 and streaming, you're going to be thinking about the new guys. So the Viacom, CBS, NBC, Discovery, Warner Media, all of those guys coming to market, trying to gain traction in a year that's going to see a cooling in terms of subscriber acquisition.
A lot of these subscription services have not obviously publicized the fact that, a certain percentage, presumably quite a large percentage over 2021 of their, in inverted commas, subscribers have actually been trialists and maybe are on a free trial. I think everybody that signed up to Quibi, for example, was on a free trial. But this is not something that is necessarily publicized. And you think that, maybe obviously as the recession kicks in a bit when it comes to consumers and consumer spending, they're going to be, less minded to convert to being paid subscribers.
It's interesting. One of the things we find in recessions is that certain entertainment packages actually do quite well. Not necessarily your big full fat pay TV, but consumers. I've always described consumers as a little bit lazy, but actually quite savvy as to what they can spend their money on. And if you've got a cheap source of entertainment that is cheaper than going out and going to the cinema, etc., consumers are quite aware that that's a way they can fill their time. So smaller services do okay. It's the expensive ones that really suffer. Having said that, you're quite right that the streamers aren't exactly publicizing the fact that they're launching into a year which is not going to be great in terms of overall performance. I think it's one of the reasons we're seeing now some quite extreme behavior coming out of Hollywood, namely the sort of ongoing arguments around simulcasting effectively of films via the SVOD and theatrical window.
That model was always bound to be disrupted at some point, wasn't it? I mean, it's if you look at the model in its own right, the windowing, it's slightly ridiculous, isn't it? I think, and it's harks back to the 70s. But obviously, I mean, that has effects for talent as well, doesn't it? When it comes to box office receipts and all sorts of other issues. And I think there's lots of people in Hollywood that are gearing up for various ways of addressing that, whether it be lawyers, whether it be talent, whether it be talent agents, etc. That it really hasn't gone down well at all, has it?
It hasn't, and you're absolutely right. There's a few reasons for that, and I think it's fascinating to talk about the talent aspect. Certainly, when you're looking at how talent's compensated, everyone from a director to, well, perhaps not everyone, but the high end talent is compensated in terms of the performance of the programming. It is very difficult, and it's always been very difficult to ascertain exactly how well titles are performing on VOD platforms. I've had conversations in the UK with certain directors, and in fact guilds of directors, who are very curious about exactly the performance that these titles are getting on VOD platforms, because they don't exactly know the remunerations that the directors and the top talent should be getting. And you're right, part of this is it's a legacy model that's existed from the 70s, so all the contracts and the legalese are based on it. But at the same time, it does present some serious sort of logistical challenges for the industry.
You can't blame them, can you? You can't blame Warner's and HBO Max, because they've got a whole load of movies that they're planning to release in 2021, and there's going to be a fraction of an audience there that there usually would be in theatres to actually view them. So why not prop up their own SVOD service with this AAA content? It's been quite slow to launch already. This is going to give that a huge shot in the arm. It's really interesting disruption of the Hollywood model, which I'm sure is going to play out right across the year. And let's see who else makes the move to take their content direct to streaming services. So what else are you seeing, Jonathan, in terms of these key trends?
Let's talk about the effect of this kind of this cooling. There's two big interaction points for any VOD service, and one is the interaction between the consumer. It's quite an obvious one, and the second is the interaction between any sort of aggregation service, so mainly pay TV and telco, and they're two parts of a puzzle there that again are sort of trends which are being massively accelerated at the moment because of the aforementioned difficulties in actually getting hold of consumers in the first place. So let's touch on the sort of integration of SVOD with pay TV. We've talked before about that funnel which is being exhausted. If you imagine that if you're an SVOD platform, you desperately need to get hold of more people to fill your funnel. And in actual fact, the obvious place to go to that is people who are already spending, a decent amount on their entertainment needs, which means sort of pay TV providers and telcos who have the credit card details of everybody who's in their ecosystem. For the last few years, what we've seen is pay TV players and telcos being quite keen to get SVOD providers added to their ecosystem because it looks great, buy Vodafone, buy data, and also you can add Netflix to your package for $5.99 a month, and you can watch anywhere and you can manage it in a very easy fashion. So it's been a bit of a one-way relationship. I want Netflix, I want Amazon, I want Disney Plus, and the power has always been very much on the SVOD end of that relationship, and that's changing. So fundamentally, that means that SVOD need to get access to these pools of subscribers. They also don't have it to themselves anymore. They've got so many competitors now popping up that if a particular telco was to prioritize, not prioritize, but drop a SVOD service because the terms weren't favorable, the repercussions wouldn't be so bad. Effectively, what this means is that in the negotiations between SVOD and those aggregators, the pay TV and the telco people, the terms are going to be increasingly favorable to the platforms, which means more integration on the consumer side. They've got a big push to make sure that libraries are, nice and joined up, no separate Netflix, Amazon, Disney library, but a single library that you can search. If you're paying for this stuff, it means that it won't be necessarily separated into the Netflix, Amazon, Disney add-ons. It will be, I want my SVOD bundle, and there'll be a single bundle which includes sort of channels and VOD as a whole. This sounds a little bit tedious and technical, but what it actually is it represents a kind of closing of a grand circle which has been playing out over the last 15 years, which has gone from TV moving to an a la carte model, i.e. SVOD. Now it's being reintegrated into platforms, and in the next year or 3 or 4 years even, we'll see that brought back into the channel bundling model. Only instead of linear channels, we'll have SVOD. It's my opinion that this is going to happen much sooner because of the COVID crunch, which is going to be exhausting those. So a real move back to the sort of traditional pay TV aggregation model because of the trends we've seen over the last year. Let me also very quickly do sort of streaming maturation. At the same time as this, if you're an SVOD provider and your growth is starting to slow in your SVOD, you need ways to keep that going that are also within your control. So not just relying on partners. And this is where AVOD comes in. So a lot of people saying 2021 will be the year of AVOD. Doesn't necessarily mean AVOD in isolation. It doesn't have to be, Pluto TV, which, although fantastic, plucky little service that I've got, I'm very keen on. It can also be AVODs which are integrated with SVOD services. So the idea that, like in a Hulu type service, you can build a large platform which has its own inbuilt consumer funnel permanently attached to it. So AVOD to draw in this user base of casually interested subscribers. And then SVOD to convert them into fully paying members. And that's another thing I think we'll see a lot of in 2021, the use of hybrid business models to create these nice, sustainable services rather than relying on partners and advertising and trials.
Yeah, because I was really surprised personally that Discovery Plus didn't launch with an AVOD option. Are they relatively late to the market? It's difficult to know, but I'm guessing that the perceived wisdom is that consumers will be looking at 3 or 4 paid VOD services, would probably be your Netflix and maybe the Amazon, maybe Disney Plus, and maybe one other might be the sort of the maximum that they'll be willing to stretch to. And for Discovery Plus to launch with a $4.99 and $6.99 model, to me, I know, going back to your earlier point, that they've got distribution through Sky Q, and I think it's Verizon in the US. So they do have. So their subscribers have access to Discovery Plus for a year, free of charge. And obviously that's where they're hoping to convert a lot of their subscribers. But I think it's incredibly brave them not launching with an AVOD model. What do you think?
It feels almost like a bit of an oversight, but I'd caveat that by saying we don't necessarily know what they've decided to do with all their library content. They don't just have to use it on their own platform. They can continue to make sort of distribution deals with various partners. So I do agree, because I am very keen on the AVOD model as a very efficient sort of platform for generating business. But Discovery's got a huge library of content, which is not the high-end TV which draws in subscribers, but sort of bread and butter, which makes up quite a large bulk of viewing. But again, is very hard to advertise and create a draw for consumers off that, which would normally scream AVOD to me. Having said that, there are platforms like Pluto again, which are appearing, which are providing an answer to the question, how do I monetize my library content if it's not SVOD? I agree largely with what you're saying. It's a little bit surprising they didn't integrate AVOD in that, but I'd also say perhaps they have thought about what else they can do with their library content and are looking maybe to keep the business lines separate and use sort of more traditional distribution methods to monetize that.
Yeah, and obviously they also have a huge number of sports rights, not least the Olympics next year and the streaming rights for the Olympics in Europe, I believe. You talked about new aggregators as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
This is a sort of, I don't know, a dirty topic of the industry that nobody's talking about. If you look at big players like HBO in the States, you might be surprised to learn that, in fact, the biggest source of new subscribers to them didn't come from pay TV or, in fact, their own advertising. The biggest source of new subscribers to HBO last year came from Amazon.
Right.
And this is from their Amazon Channels partnership platform. And I was running some numbers on this based on whatever I could cobble together from various annual reports. And the number of sort of subscriptions running through Amazon Channels just in the States was around 50 million, which was an enormous number, which was quite surprising to me. But effectively, what it means is that Amazon has been proven very successful for using its sort of Prime Video as a draw, and then allowing users to add, one or two subscriptions just to the top of that. Things like Stars Play, Cinemax, Showtime, things that are more on the thematic end of the VOD rather than the big generalist like Netflix. And it's kind of demonstrating why pay TV was so good in its day, because it brings you to a platform which says, look, here's your content, here's what you can choose from, rather than full OTT distribution, which is just kind of, here's the internet, go find your stuff. And it's always very difficult to know where to start. But Amazon aren't the only guys doing this. So Roku, of course, are big players in this game, not only in terms of having a sort of generic aggregation device, but also in terms of having their own paid aggregation platform in terms of Roku channels. Apple is another player in this game. There's a few names for these kind of aggregators. You can call them OTT aggregators. We coined a term back at MBI, which was the ALCAs, which are the a la carte aggregators, which I quite liked. It's effectively any platform which allows you to add multiple paid services on an OTT player. And these are incredibly appealing if you're a consumer, because they allow you complete freedom in terms of how you are subscribing. So there are never going to be any bills that are more than a month in terms of a contract. You can take it with you anywhere. Amazon is probably, or one of these guys, Amazon or Apple, you probably already have an existing relationship with. They already have your credit card details. So it's very easy to start adding these devices. We know it's been a huge success in the US, and we know that these guys are rolling out across Europe, across APAC. And it's at a time where, if you're a pay TV player, things are starting to calm down a little bit. You're aware that your future hasn't been completely destroyed, and you're making new relationships with SVOD services. But I do think that there's going to be a new wave of disruption, and it's going to come from these ALCAs, who frankly have kind of a really unbalanced level of competition with people like pay TV. Let me explain that a little bit. If your main business is not selling entertainment, but you also sell entertainment on the side, it means it's very easy for you to sell at cost. It's very easy for you to make very lucrative partnerships in order to gain market share. Amazon wants to sell shopping, Apple wants to sell devices. So it makes them very dangerous people to compete with if you are fully in the business of selling entertainment.
As you keep mentioning, they have got the billing relationships with the consumers.
Exactly, which is, if you talk to anyone who's an expert in subscriber acquisition, the biggest hurdle is getting someone to input their credit card details.
Absolutely, because it's, as you say, it's going back to what we started talking about. It's the perennial trialists that are always worried about clicking that button to say, I'm now committing to X amount of time. And I think everybody's been through that. They've been through that pay, the cord cutting. Now, what do they want to do? Is to add more and more services on? Probably not. But the billing relationship is key. And how about mergers and acquisitions next year and this sort of vertical integration you mentioned?
This again relates to the fact that streaming as a business is fascinating. It's changed the way the industry operates, right across the value chain from production all the way to the consumer at the other side. But it's not terribly profitable. If you look at anyone who's involved in it, probably Disney aside, there's not huge margins on the streaming game. And in fact, Disney are very important as an example. I'll come back to that in a second. There needs to be a better way of monetizing IP. Part of that is what we've been talking about before in terms of hybrid services. But part of that is looking at ways that really successful media companies have made their money. And I will talk about Disney because they've done this so well. And it's vertical integration. It's the idea that instead of buying the IP, buying the production, putting it on your channel, and then trying to do something with the rights afterwards. The idea is that if you own all of these segments that fit around your streaming service, you suddenly become a lot more profitable. Why? Because you're not paying that 40% every time you need to license something. So to look at Disney as an example, they own the IP, so they own the toys. Look at Star Wars. They own the little action figures that go with their kids programming. They own the rights to the kids programming. They own a decent amount of production companies that make the programming. Then they own the platforms that show the programming. And then they own the theme parks that you then go to interact with. They own the games. They own so many verticals around their IP that every time that they produce any piece of content, it's advertising for a separate window. If you're a standalone streamer, such as Netflix, but also this extends to people like Warner who need to do this a little bit better, you have to make the biggest use of your IP. I put out a prediction a couple of years back, which didn't come true. I was quite cross about that, which was that Netflix would buy Entertainment One, specifically because Entertainment One owns an awful lot of content that was key to Netflix, especially for kids. And it would be perfect acquisition for taking IP, showing it, and turning it into sort of toys and things like that. A fantastic saving in terms of actually paying for the rights. And then every time you have a toy or a program, one advertises the other. So effectively, consumers are paying you to advertise your products back to them, which is very efficient. But of course, that didn't happen. Instead, Hasbro bought Entertainment One. And if I wanted to be, really controversial, I'd say that Netflix should, in turn, buy Hasbro as part of this vertical integration, which would give them, the IP via Entertainment One, the ability to distribute toys via Hasbro, and the ability to distribute the programming via the Netflix streaming service, which would make it a very efficient monetization model in terms of I have IP, I own the rights to it, I advertise it via my streaming services, which consumers pay me for, and I also make the toys, which in turn pay for the streaming service. So that's vertical integration. Fundamentally, the problem is streaming is a low margin business, and it's something that is occasionally talked about in the industry and generally just accepted that there's this huge debt cloud hanging over streaming. But it will have to pay for itself at some point. And I do believe that the way to do that will involve a large amount of acquisitions around the IP. So including production companies, including manufacturers, including anyone who owns IP to big franchises. And so any standalone streaming service over the next couple of years will quickly become not a standalone streaming service, and instead a mature business that has multiple facets to how it looks at IP.
And it brings us back to the old adage, content is king, of course. If you're a producer and you've got some good IP, then, the future is relatively bright.
Absolutely. Probably more so than in the past few years. There's been a huge push to get anything that is everything produced and put on a service. And now if your IP is strong, I think the value of it is increasing because the guys with the deep pockets are going to be starting to look at bringing that in-house. So yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to say it's a gold mine, but it's certainly going to be more valuable than it has been in the past.
Fascinating. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on TellyCast. Really enjoyed our chat. Lots of sort of weighty topics and issues there to chew over, I think. I'd love to have you come back on the show and maybe discuss more of those as the year goes on.
Lovely to be here. Thank you, Justin.
So once again, it's time to catch up with our resident career coach and wellbeing expert, Tracy Forsyth. Tracy, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. What have you got for us this week?
Well, today I thought I'd talk about self-belief and confidence and how you can use your physical body to increase both of those two things. So lots of people that I work with are either terrified of public speaking or feel worried about interviews or meeting people for the first time. And so I want to show you 5 simple things that you can do with your body to really make you feel really confident and not only feel it, but look it too. Okay. When we are stressed and panicky, our breath gets very short and shallow, doesn't it? The body is really, really clever. So it does its best to help you in times of need, and it can do so much more. So if you're ever in a position where you want a boost of confidence and self-belief, then try these methods. All right. So the first one is to use your breath. So if you've got a big presentation or a difficult conversation coming up or an interview over Zoom, dare I say, and want to feel powerfully calm, try this. So breathe in for 2 counts and then breathe out for 4 counts. So let's do that. So breathe in, 1, 2, and then out for 1, 2, 3, 4. In, 1, 2, and then out, 1, 2, 3, 4. So one more time, breathe in, 1, 2, and then out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do. Right. Second thing is to stand or sit tall. So if you want to make a physical impact, either around a table in a big meeting, or just when meeting somebody for the first time, or even if you're sort of doing a chat on Zoom, pull yourself up to your highest point possible with a long, straight spine. So sit up. And even if you're tiny, this will work. So it doesn't matter whether you're tall or short or et cetera, pulling yourself up to the highest you can be will definitely help. So, and actually, if you're already tall, don't slouch to come down to other people's levels. Standing or sitting tall will not only make you look more confident, but feel it too. So one of the simplest standing postures in yoga is called mountain pose, because a mountain is tall and strong. So, stand like a mountain. My third thing is put your shoulders back. So we live in the digital era, which means we are almost constantly hunched over a laptop or a smartphone. And what this means is that we are curving inwards, with our pectoral muscles getting tighter and shorter and our shoulder muscles getting weaker and weaker, pulling everything forward and down. So the more that happens, the harder it is to counterbalance. So on a daily, hourly basis, raise your shoulders up, back and down, and keep them back and down. And if this feels weird, it just means you need to do it more. So the benefit of this posture is that your ribs have more room to expand, meaning you can take deeper breaths, enabling you to bring more oxygen into your system. And there's something very confident about having your shoulders back and your chest sort of proudly forward.
Yeah, there is. There's a sort of a stance that you assume, isn't there, when you actually do that? And I'm really guilty of hunching my shoulders round. It's just natural, as you say.
That's one. So sit up straight with a long, straight spine and put your shoulders back. Okay. So the next thing is about your chin. Okay. So my dad always used to say, chin up to me if I was feeling down. And there is something about having your chin up that makes you look confident, nonchalant, and undefeated. So having your chin up physically means that the throat is open and not constricted. And in yogic philosophy, the throat area relates to expression and speaking your truth. So we all know that when we're deeply moved or upset, we can have a lump in our throat or find it difficult to speak. So lift your chin up to free that throat area, enabling you to speak more confidently. And lastly, hold your head high, as if you were being pulled by a thread from the crown of your head. So I don't know whether you've watched Beyonce's film Black is King, but you might remember what I think is a fantastic quote: you can't wear a crown if your head is down. So literally hold your head up as if you are wearing a precious crown. You will look regal, empowered, confident, and feel it too. Justin, how are you feeling?
I feel I could pitch anything to anyone right now. We're all about looking forward to next year in this week's show. So next year, hopefully everybody's going to be pitching to everybody and the business is going to explode. So thank you very much for those tips. As usual, we'll include a link both in the episode description, but also in the TellyCast Plus newsletter. We'll send a link to one of your exercises there. So thank you so much for being on the show again.
You're very welcome, Justin.
Well, that's it for this week's show. As always, thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it on social media with friends and colleagues. And just a reminder, we've started a new free newsletter called TellyCast Plus. We aim to make it the most useful thing coming into your inbox every Friday. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories of the week that you might have missed, jobs news, execs available for hire, Tracy's tip of the week, and more insight and opinion that you can shake a stick at. And it's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at www.telecast-podcast.com. That's telecast-podcast.com. And you'll also find that link in the episode description. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers. So until next Thursday, as always, stay safe.